Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Kalani and Asuelu videos. Brianna says, the closed captioning that they put on your video said, hey, disturbing listeners, instead of, hey, deserving listeners, LOL. That's funny. So in the closed captioning, when I said, hey, deserving listeners, it said, hey, disturbing listeners. Well, I guess YouTube is trying to tell you something. I don't know. Diarrhea Dave, what a wonderful name that is, says, I don't think the mom said, I hate you. I think she said, I heard you. Interesting. Yeah, because when she said, I hate you, I thought, what is happening right now? So maybe it was something else that she said, and we just didn't hear it right. Bao says, you're the pineapple of my life, quoting Kalani and Asuelu. This couple has a lot of issues, but sometimes they're just so darn cute, LOL. Agreed. Lottie says, Dr. Kirk, you are the pineapple of our lives. And you of mine, Lottie. Alyo says, thank you for sharing your thoughts and expertise on this subject. Division of housework has been a major issue in my relationship since I started working from home. My spouse somehow thinks that means I have all this extra time to keep up the house and take care of kids while working. Yeah, I discovered this early in my career with couples and families that I'd be treating. I would have heterosexual couples where the male would be not doing much of the housework, and these men would be reasonable fellas, and so I would talk with them. Okay, well, let's work out the division of labor here. You're both working, so you probably need to be doing 50% of the housework, and we would just logically work out how much time or how much effort certain things take and divvy it up. And I'd say, okay, work is done. Moving on to the next topic in couples therapy with these people, and the male, the husband, would come back to the next session, and the wife would say, he didn't do any of the work. He didn't do any of it. He's doing like 5% of the work. And I'd looked at the guy and be like, what's going on? And we would, for weeks, months, be going back and forth. I was like, I don't understand. How do you not understand this 50-50 thing? And I came to the realization that the misogynistic, sexist, gender norm propaganda becomes so infused in some people's personalities that to change, it's like trying to deprogram someone from a cult. You could consider us all within the cult of mainstream American gender culture and race culture as well, and really all the different isms, classism, ableism, ageism, that to behave differently, to think differently, takes years and years of deprogramming. So I would have to work with these men on things that I found to just be completely logical. Like, you both work 40-hour a week jobs. There's a certain amount of hours of housework that needs to be done. One person does 50%, the other person does the other for 50%. That sounds pretty reasonable to me, but these men just could not wrap their heads around it. It's just like, yeah, but that's women's work. Or, yeah, but she's really good at that. I'm like, well, there's a reason why she's good at it. It's just because you never try to be good at it. It doesn't take a genius to clean a toilet. You know what I mean? And it was just such a frustrating thing, because I'm a guy, and I would like to think that early in my life, I just logicked that brainwashing away. I just thought, well, it doesn't make any sense that I believe that, so let's dispel that notion. But I'd be talking with these men, and it was just like, and then you add the fact that a lot of men are walking around feeling emasculated, feeling as though they are not real men, or they're not treated like real men because they generally don't like their lives, or they generally feel disrespected. And they attach that feeling onto masculinity. And as a way of trying to compensate for that feeling of low self-esteem, they will try to hyper-masculinize themselves, which might mean actually not doing any housework. And to do housework for them could on one hand, they could be like, okay, it makes sense to be doing 50%. But on the other hand, they could be thinking, well, if I do that housework, I will associate that with more emasculation and more disrespect and more lowering of my self-worth, more me becoming more like a woman, which is, I was taught by all the messages in our society that is the worst thing I could ever do as a man. And it's too hard for them. And they just, so with a lot of these guys, I would eventually learn, okay, we've got to, one, deprogram them, which is not easy. It's similar to doing domestic violence work with perpetrators. You have to deprogram, you have to re-educate, you have to brainwash them on a new idea. The other thing is trying to build up their self-esteem, because when you have and that's maybe where I was more flexible, is that when you have self-esteem and you like yourself and you are proud of who you are, you don't need to hang your pride on toxic masculinity or certain ideas in our culture, which a lot of people do. And that's really how I see a lot of the toxicity in our society is, whether it's white supremacy or something, KKK, that kind of thing. I see a lot of people who are struggling with their self-esteem, and they're attaching themselves to a cause that gives them this pseudo sense of self-worth. You have a white guy, middle-aged guy who hates his life, feels like the world has left him behind. His youth is over and his job, he just got fired or something, and he's upset. He doesn't know what to do. And these people come along and say, you are the master race. You are better than other people. There's something special about you. You are genetically superior. And that makes you feel good. Similar to the incel movement, you have men online who are sad or awkward or socially anxious, and they're trying to date because they're trying to get their needs met, sexual, romantic, attachment needs met, relationship, companionship needs met. And it doesn't go very well. Well, they go on the internet and they're feeling low. They don't know what to do. And then these people swoop in to say, the reason why you are feeling the way that you do is because of feminism. Feminism is destroying our society and is making women into these feminazis who are using their sexuality. And that's why all those women have dumped you. And that's why none of the women are swiping right on you. It's because of liberalism and, this movement. And so it's just better just to, call off the whole thing. Well, we welcome you into our cult of incel, MG, pickup artist, MGTOW people. So I wonder if, a lot of these men that I was treating, and maybe some of the men that heterosexual men that you might be interacting with out there, that it's self-esteem that is causing the problem. Because like I was saying, for me, when I was faced with this idea of, I'm going to have to alter my masculinity in order for it to be fair. I'm going to have to alter my behavior. I'm going to have to alter how I feel about things, how I feel about doing chores. I grew up in a pretty traditional gender house. My parents were, pretty traditional gender. My dad went to work at Boeing, which is, the airplane place, and my mom stayed at home primarily. And I absorbed all those ideas, and so I naturally, and then on the television, all the messages I was receiving. But once I entered into adulthood, I started realizing that a lot of that didn't make any sense, and so I had to somehow adjust. Well, for me to give up certain aspects of my masculinity that were toxic, I had to stand on a foundation of pride and of self-esteem so that I could say, well, I'm still a good person even though I'm not acting like a quintessential traditional male. I'm still okay. I'm still acceptable as a human being, whereas, not everyone has that. All right, this next comment is from Rye. They say, oh no, we have broken the good doctor. Now he's fantasizing about an MMA fight between Tammy and Debbie. No. Yeah, some of these shows are slightly, I don't know if breaking me is the proper term, but affecting me. Let's just put it that way. Elizabeth and Andre, the RV fight episode, that's what I called the episode, RV fight. Jay says, I'm loving the titles of your videos, Charlie fight, boat fight, RV fight. Yeah, just a little peek behind the curtain. I will be editing the episode, after I record it. And I'm thinking, well, what do I call this? And I usually I have a lot of things to do for this podcast, so I usually try not to think about it too long. And I usually just half a second, I'm like, well, they're fighting on an RV, so RV fight. And sometimes I don't realize it, but I will name episodes very similarly over time but I don't keep track of the names, so sometimes you see this interesting kind of pattern: Charlie fight, boat fight, RV fight. Jade says, this scene on the RV irritated me so much because it is the most clear demonstration of the anger the siblings have towards Chuck and Libby being directed at Andre. Regardless of how anyone feels about Andre's personality, seeking opportunity does not equal Machiavellianism. Absolutely agreed, Jade. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, in terms of what we've seen, it's like, what's wrong with two people in business talking about business? Like, is that against the rules somehow? I mean, it'd be perfectly okay if Rebecca talked with Chuck about business. Would that not be okay? But yeah, clearly something else is going on in this family. Some historical relational problem is being displaced onto Andre. I mean, at least that's my speculation. Good old Twinkle Toes says, I come from a large family as well, lots of kids and checked out parents, and we have a similar dynamic when any new person tries to assert themselves and gain favors in our family. Andre is threatening to take every bit of attention and admiration they've finally achieved from their father after decades of being ignored and devalued. Yeah, it's possible. We don't know, or at least I don't know the history of this family, but it's a strong hypothesis that we can develop regarding the lack of support or the degree of distance or the uncertainty that has happened throughout the family's time together, and how when Andre comes in and is taking some resources, love, attention, money, then the siblings become very upset because they've worked really hard to get a little bit of attention from them. I mean, who knows, but another part of this conceptualization would be that the kids actually work for the father because they're still trying to get love and attention from him that they never got when they were growing up. I don't know anything I don't have any data really to back that up, pretty circumstantial evidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something along those lines. I mean, it certainly would explain why Charlie, Rebecca, and Jen are seemingly delusionally angry at Andre. It's just like Chuck and Andre are in business together. Chuck said, yes, Andre, let's work together. What's the problem? I'm just like, I don't understand. They can't talk about business. What? It's really talk about shows breaking me. There's some about that that just kind of breaks my brain. Zuzu says, and that's what I call my cat, by the way, Zuzu. Her full name is Azula from Avatar, but I like to call her Zuzu. Actually, I like to call her Meal Pops. I don't know if y'all saw the meme that was going around a number of months ago. There was I think it was like a Russian cereal commercial, Meal Pops, Zuzu, Zuzu, Zuzu. And then there was this person imitating that song on TikTok or something, and then I heard it from someone else, and I just loved it. And so I started singing that to my cat, Meal Pops, Zuzu, 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 because of Zuzu and Azula. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what kind of weird names you have for your animals. I have a dog that is named Leia, from Princess Leia, and my wife Stacy will call Leia Littles. She would say, "Oh, Little," because she's the little dog, and then eventually Stacy started calling the dog Lidu. Lidu is little Lidu, and I misheard what the wife was saying. Lidu. I thought it was we do. I thought she was saying we do, and so I started calling the dog we do. We do. And then my wife said, "Why are you calling the dog Weedu?" I'm like, "Well, that's what you call the dog." And she's like, "No, I call Lidu from little." And I'm like, "Oh, it doesn't sound like, it's the way she says it's a very small difference between L and W." And then since I call Weedu, I started calling the dog Weeds. And now I'm starting to call her different kinds of weeds, like dandelion weeds. So the evolution of what we call our animals or our friends is fascinating. So the Meal Pops thing. But anyway, What do you call your animals? Okay, so Zuzu says, Chuck is a grown man, a father, and a businessman. I don't fully understand why his children don't trust him to make his own decisions. I wouldn't talk to my parents that way, even if I was in business with them. Yes, agree with you, Zuzu. Sam says, this family triggers me so badly because it reminds me of my own. I recently had to stop all contact with my parents because my siblings won't stop butting in when I try to put boundaries with my controlling parents. These kids are trained to fight for their father's love and attention because the dad played favorites and triangulated his kids against their own siblings. Yeah, I don't know if you have special information, Sam, that would bolster that claim, but there certainly seems to be some circumstantial evidence of that. And we've actually seen that activity, that sort of triangulation happening this season. Elizabeth and Andre, the baby stairs, when the baby almost fell down the stairs. Opinionated Kraken Troll says, cultural difference on baby supervision. I can attest to this. Eastern European families all take it upon themselves to watch every baby, regardless of whose baby it belongs to. Americans need to be told they are responsible for a child in a room for them to consciously pay attention to a child which isn't theirs. I hate that Libby's family doesn't just automatically jump up when Libby's baby started walking towards the stairs. Yeah, so this is an interesting cultural element that I hadn't considered when watching it, but when people started bringing it up, including you, Opinionated Crack Control, it makes total sense that in, I think, most places around the world, people, when they see a baby, even if it's not their child, they feel responsible, sort of, and if the baby was doing something unsafe, anyone would reach out and try to help. And some other people were commenting about how in the United States we're so scared of being sued for everything that we don't want to get involved because we might get sued or we might be accused of, I think this is another problem. I think a lot of people will think we're being accused of being a predator if we actually pay it even. I mean, I'll tell you, as a man, I'll see a cute kid and I'll just like, oh, there's a cute kid. It's, they're looking at you and smiling. And there's a flash thought that goes through my head sometimes. It's like, do people think I'm a predator because I'm having a moment with this child? Like, it's a thing. And so, okay, maybe I shouldn't be interacting with this child that I don't know because I don't want to come across like I'm a predator. Is that a concern I should have? And this actually goes way back when I was in my mid-20s and I was going to graduate school to become a therapist. I had this job where I would watch kids. It was sort of part of a therapy program where the kids were having really tough times in their homes, and so there was therapists involved and psychiatrists and doctors, and then they would have us. I think they called us counselors, but I would think of ourselves as sort of like glorified babysitters. And so we would take the kid out of the house, give the family a break, and I would entertain the kid. We'd just go anywhere. We'd go to McDonald's or the park or play video games or something. And I was also supposed to be a part of the therapeutic team, and there were certain interventions that I was supposed to be doing, even though I wasn't a therapist yet. And I'd be taking these kids out into the world, and I didn't look like I was their dad. One, I'm Asian. Two, I had like really, really long hair, and I looked young. And so it just looked strange, this youngish, long-haired, hippie-looking guy, Asian, hanging out with this young, white or black kid or something. And we were going to the pool. Like this one kid loved going to the pool. And so we'd have to go into the locker room and the kid would change and I'd just be sitting there fully clothed with like my backpack or, my satchel or something. And so I always would get these looks from people. I was like, what is that guy doing? And on some level I get it. But on the other hand, I think all that contributes to what I think might have happened with Elizabeth and Andre and their family was when the baby was walking up the stairs, the other siblings might not have well, first off, I'll say, I don't know if any of us know exactly what went down when the baby went up the stairs. There's two possibilities, mainly. One is that no one was around. Andre was the only one with the child, and Andre goes to the bathroom, and then the child started going up the stairs, and no one was around to see it. The other option is everyone was around to see it, or at least other people were, And either they didn't notice or they didn't see or they didn't do anything because of this difference in culture, either because of fear of being sued or fear of being seen like a predator. Of course, Libby's family wouldn't be accused of being a predator. One, because they're women, they're less likely to be accused of that for, I think, good statistical reasons. But it ignores the fact that some women are absolutely predators for sure, and I've treated them before. And they're very scary, just as scary as any other predator, by the way. But so I don't think that they would do that. But they could have, if they were around, they might not have considered themselves responsible because of the American individualism, the American isolation, the American ideas of like, that's your problem, not my problem. And, it's an interesting thing to think about. So, yeah, and I'll tell you that I think our American way is bad. I think it's a terrible way to live. I think we should all care about children. I think it's natural for us to care about children, even if they're not our kids. And if they're headed towards danger, I think it's natural for humans to want to do something about it. But because of our weird society, it prevents us from doing things that would be helpful. And it's just unfortunate. It's just another example of how just isolated and how weird we are as a culture in the United States, and how alone and isolated and without any support. I mean, imagine, all you parents out there of young children, imagine if you had 10 other people that, sort of rotated in and out of helping you with parenting. Just imagine that. Just imagine you all day long. I'm not talking like just on, every once in a while. I'm talking all day long. You are sitting there with your kid, and at any given moment, you've got 3 people who can watch your child, feed your child, play with your child, entertain your child. I mean, you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting with the child, but you can take breaks. You can go to the store for a few hours. You can come back. You know that grandma or grandpa, some of you maybe even have this. But the common scenario for parents that I see anyway in Seattle is it's just the parents. And sometimes it's just one of the parents. And they are responsible 24/7 for that child, and no one else is helping. And there's just like really hard to get a babysitter. Maybe they moved across the country to work in Seattle, and all of their extended family, their parents, their siblings, all this, they live across, the world sometimes. And I don't think that's a functional way to be a parent. It's not the way we did things for centuries and centuries and centuries, because we didn't have the luxury of, 1, moving far away, and 2, having separate rooms for everything. So anyway, just another rant that I have. Colt finally got around to watching Colt on the Single Life. Ryu says, Colt says, I'm self-destructive when I'm single. Colt said, I'm self-destructive when I'm single. I guess he gets to destroy someone else's life when he's not single. That's a good point, Ryu. Ash says, I like when people ask me where I'm from. Okay, so pausing here. In the episode, I think Colt asked someone, where are you from? And I talked about how, as an Asian person, Asian American person who, has, I go way back. my Asian American ancestry goes back 120 years. So I am of Washington State. My Asian American ancestors were farmers and laborers. They worked on the railroad. They worked in hotels. And when people from out of the area, they move here from New York or California, and they see all the other white people in Seattle, and they never ask them any question. But then they look at me and they're like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from here. You're the new person. I should be asking you where you're from. So don't ask me. I'm here. My people are from Seattle. My people are from Washington State. Where are you from?" Now, every time someone asks me that, it's not that big of a deal. But the conglomeration of 50 years of being asked that question, particularly when I step outside of Seattle, because you step outside Seattle, it gets very white very quick. And there's a lot of questions. Where are you from? I'm from Seattle. Oh, no, where are you really from? And every time someone asks me those questions, it's not horrible, but it just reminds me of how white people think of me as a foreigner. White people think of me as, I'm not American. I can't, you ask a white person where they're from and they're like, oh, I'm from Seattle. No one questions that. You're not like, no, where are you really from? Well, that's what I was, I'm from Seattle. Oh, no, where are you really from? So it's not awful, but it represents something. It's the tip of the iceberg of racism and white supremacy and anti-Asian Americanism that has existed not only for me, but much more for my ancestors. My ancestors experienced massive amounts of racism to the point that my family members were imprisoned during World War II, even though they were American citizens and had lived in this country for decades. They were rounded up because of that notion of foreigner. They didn't do it to Germans, or Italians, even though we were at war with Germany and Italy. There were pockets of it, but not nearly. They rounded up every single Japanese American with a certain mileage from the coast, which is virtually every single Japanese American on the mainland, and put them in prisons because white Americans saw me and my family members as foreigners, even though we were American citizens. So when people ask me where I'm from, it reminds me of all that crap. It reminds me of my family members being imprisoned because of the way white people see us as foreigners. So it's not a pleasant thing to ask. Now, when someone asks me that question, I don't blame them for that. They didn't take Asian American studies at college. They haven't heard someone rant about this or whatever. So it's not like they lack empathy. They don't lack empathy. They're just representative and representing the foreignization and the otherizing of Asian American citizens. So that's why it drives me crazy and it hurts my feelings. It hurts. That's why I get angry. It hurts. And if that was the extent to the racism I experienced, then that would and that representation of where are you from question is representative of 99 other examples I could give you that have repeatedly happened to me and my people throughout my life and throughout our for 100 years. So when someone asks me where I'm from, it's the tip of the iceberg of the foreignization, which is a tip of the iceberg to racism against Asian Americans. Someone asking me where I'm from is not massively racist. It's ignorant. It's bothersome. I don't think I've ever yelled at someone for asking me that question. But if I'm a little sensitive about it, and if other people like me are sensitive about it, it's because of that. So just get that. Understand that, okay? Having said that, there's nothing wrong with being curious about where someone is from if you are not foreignizing someone. If you're generally curious about where everyone's from, regardless of what they look like, then okay. But if you are not aware of the fact that, asking that to some people is going to bother them, that doesn't excuse it anyways, because there are a lot of comments along those lines. So Ash says, I like when people ask where I'm from, and I also like to ask that question to others. Okay, first off, Ash, totally fine. If you like being asked that question, totally fine. But it's a false equalization of saying, because I like being asked where I'm from, I will ask others, and that makes it okay. That doesn't make it okay. If you like being asked it, totally fine. But we all understand that our experience isn't everyone's experience. I just see it as a way to get to know people on a deeper level. Agreed. It's fine. Sometimes when people come to America, they feel the need to minimize their ethnic heritage to fit in. And I just want to communicate the message that I have an interest in that history that makes them wonderful and unique. Yes, totally. The way you're saying it, Ash, totally fine. But you have to be aware of the sensitivity of people that get asked that question almost all the time. It is not in that vein. It is in the vein of, you're not white. What are you? Especially me being half Asian, people are confused. Like, what, are you Mexican? What, are you Hawaiian? What's going on? People, white Americans, they need to categorize. And because there's this class issue, this race issue of like, how am I supposed to treat you? I don't know where to stereotype you yet, because you look like you kind of have eyes like an Asian, but I can't tell. So yeah, Cleopatra says, I get asked where I'm from all the time. It's extremely annoying and makes me feel like I don't belong anywhere. Yes. Haley says, instead of asking people where they're from, I usually ask if they grew up in a country we're in, regardless of what they look like. They'll specify where if it's not there. No one seems to be offended by that, and they're free to talk about their heritage if they wish, but I never force it. Okay, Haley. So just because no one appears to be offended by it does not mean they're not offended by it. I have been asked where I'm from, and I have always been offended by it, even when I was 13 years old, because I had enough of those questions up until that point, and racism was much more overt in the 70s and 80s in the United States against Asians. But I never let on that I was offended. Why? Because I don't want to be impolite, and I don't want to be a jerk, and I don't know what to say, and I don't think I'm going to get any kind of empathy from people if I say, literally the only time I talk about this issue of, the fact that I don't like it is on this podcast. Why is that? Well, because no one can tell me to shut up, because this is my show and I got to say whatever I want to, and no one can interrupt me. I got the microphone. I have the power. But in the real world, I don't say anything because I don't have the power. And if I did say something, I'm quite positive they would think I was the jerk face for saying something. So, Haley, just because you've asked the question many times and no one appears to be offended, I guarantee you does not mean that they weren't offended. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but that you can't rely on that. Even if someone asked me, is it okay if I ask you that question? I would say, yes, it's fine, because I don't want to get into a fight with some random person. And maybe that makes me part of the problem. I don't know, but I'm just trying to survive. But let's analyze your statement here. Instead of asking people where they're from, I usually ask if they grew up in the country we're in, regardless of what they look like. Okay, again, if you walk up to a random white person and say, do you ask that of everyone? They don't have an accent, okay? A white person, no accent, you go, did you grow up in this country? Okay, if that's true, to a white person, they're probably not going to be offended by that in all likelihood because they haven't been asked that question maybe ever. If you ask that to people like me, if you ask that to me, so I don't know that you ask it to everyone. I wouldn't know that. Okay, I would only know that you're asking me that question, and I'm telling you that would offend me. I wouldn't let on it offended me, but if you, Haley, came up to me and said, did you grow up in this country? I'd be like, ugh. On the inside, I'd just be like, are you kidding me? But I'd say, yep, born and raised in Seattle. That's what I'd say. And I've been asked that question before. So just because you ask it of everyone doesn't excuse you ignoring the fact that for some people, it is extremely hurtful to them, all right? Formica Forever says, thank you for talking about a lot of people that have cats. I currently have a total of 16 cats plus two dogs that I'm caring for, as the area I live in is a dumping ground for unwanted cats. Well, Formica Forever. Good old Formica Forever. Thank you so much for taking those cats, and you're a saint. Everyone acts like I'm the crazy cat lady, but I am just trying to get them adopted. Right. So in the aside in the Colt episode, we have this cultural notion that, like, if you have, especially if you're I guess anyone, but I think particularly if you're a guy, but anyway, point is that there's this cultural notion that if you have a certain amount of cats, say definitely 4 cats, if you have 4 cats, if you have 6 cats, there's something wrong with you. And I'm always like, what? Well, if you had 4 dogs, I think you'd get questions. But I think if you have 4 cats, you're instantly suspect. You're just like, oh, you're a crazy cat lady or something. We have this weird, it's like, are you a dog person? Are you a cat person? Dogs and cats, they're both great. Cats have a variety of personalities. Dogs have a variety of personalities. There's some overlap. Like one of the things you'll hear people say as they're trying to defend their cats is like, oh, you'll love this cat. He's like a dog. You'll hear people say that. My cat's great. He's almost like a dog. It's like, your cat doesn't have to be like a dog to be great. Cats are great. Cats are wonderful. Cats are wonderful creatures. Dogs are wonderful creatures. They're all wonderful creatures. And having 16 cats because you've taken them all in because they would have been, killed or, on the street or something, makes you a saint. It doesn't make you a crazy cat lady. Big Ed said, Big Ed video, the one with the daughter. Michelle says, I don't get along. So Ed was saying, I don't get along with people my age. Sounds like women my age don't tolerate my BS. All right, so let's go into this. I think I went into a little bit on the episode, but so Big Ed is saying, I don't get along with women my age. I don't get along with people my age. Okay, what was that? What could that mean? On one hand, it could mean, well, I found when I'm dating women my own age, they don't tolerate my BS, and I have to find younger, more impressionable people to date. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that as he has, I think, massive attachment issues that play itself out in his relationships. I think that's pretty clear, given the phone call, the infamous phone call that we heard, that he was just almost delusionally jealous and extremely angry, which illuminates a lot of hurt that's going on underneath that, and a lot of assumptions about his entitlement, and he's just all kind of wrapped up into that abusive language, and possible love bombing that's happening as well. Listen to my deep dive on love bombing for more information on that. Actually, that was a really fun episode to do. I don't know if I've talked about that, but I did 2 deep dives for patrons only on love bombing, and it really illuminated a lot of things that I'd seen in my life that I never was really able to put into words. But and it was sort of a culmination of a lot of knowledge that I've built over the years with regards to personality disorders and attachment and relationships and psychopathy and sociopathy and antisocial personality disorder. And anyway, so we see that with Ed, and or at least it looks that way. And so on one hand, it's like, well, I don't like women my age because they don't tolerate my BS, and I need impressionable younger women who will put up with my BS. Another possibility is that as he approaches people that he meets and tries to develop a relationship, things don't go well for him, and because of his attachment issues, and or he's terrified, or there's something going on there, and he either is rejected or he freaks out and he gets angry, but he finds that with younger people, the relationships last a little bit longer than they would otherwise because of that power differential. So that's another way of looking at it. It's not just a conscious thing like, I'm a psychopath. And it's possible he is. It's not likely given percentages, but it's possible. So there's the psychopathic interpretation that he knows that he needs to prey on younger girls in order for them to, younger women, in order for him to get his needs met. What's more likely, percentage-wise, is that he's desperately trying to get closeness, and because of his attachment injuries, he gets triggered easily and falls into a really destructive pattern of trying to retain the relationship while actually pushing them away, and is actually looking to younger women because it just tends to work more readily for him because of that power differential. Anyway. Doesn't excuse it. It's still abusive. Lisa says, as a woman in my early 60s, I can understand enjoying the company of younger people. There's an energy and an optimism that can be missing in people my own age. Right. So Lisa is sort of, I guess, defending Ed in a certain way of just saying, sometimes people like younger people. There's nothing wrong with that. And there is, I keep saying this in those episodes that we have this heuristic that if there's an age difference, it's creepy, there's something wrong, there's a exploitation automatically happening, and that's just not true. Is it true with Big Ed and Liz and Rose? Yes, it seems as though, but just the fact that there's an age difference isn't the thing that we should be focusing on. What we should be focusing on is the attachment injury, the exploitation, the power, the entitlement, which can occur at the same age and can occur from younger people. Take it from me, folks. Younger people can exploit older people. It happens. So just looking at an age difference is a tiny little red flag, but you want to look at actually if and what kind of exploitation and in what direction it's happening. And also, if we look at a same-age relationship, we don't want to just assume there isn't exploitation happening, because there absolutely can, and high control can happen. I reacted to the Paris Jackson and Willow Smith, interview or conversation. Sani says, "Thank you so much for addressing the paparazzi problem in connection with consumers clicking or buying the articles. This is something I always preach to others when it comes to such things, because it simply disgusts me. Refusing to click is powerful, and many just don't think about it. You nailed this statement." Right. So, and I'll just say it again, this is an opinion that I've sort of developed as I've been reacting to the videos that y'all want me to watch. The Britney Spears, the Paris Hilton, now with the Paris Jackson. We see these paparazzi just, I don't know any other way to describe it other than harassment. It's harassment. It can't be considered a good for our society that this happens. And I just don't understand it. So, and there has been, apparently it's hard to, okay, I'm not a lawyer. I think, but I listen to a lot of legal podcasts. There's this great one called "What Can Trump Teach Us About Con Law, About Constitutional Law?" It's by the Roman Mars that makes the 99% Invisible podcast that I also listen to. And they interview this judge or lawyer, and she gives this, or a professor. Anyway, she when you understand the law, you're like, oh, I guess. So I don't know, but I think the reason why the paparazzi are protected by the law is because we want the press to be free. We want freedom to the press to move and take pictures and to interview whoever they want. We don't want to have laws where, because if you protect people from paparazzi, then you can protect politicians from being asked questions, and we don't want that, right? We want freedom of the press, this kind of thing. But if we do not click on those clickbait titles, if we do not buy the tabloids, if we don't go to websites that support the paparazzi, then the paparazzi will disappear. So it's at least partially our fault. I would say the government should probably do some more things, but if the government isn't going to do anything, or if the laws are such that we need to protect the freedom of the press because that's a bigger, more important, institution, and we don't want to threaten that, then it's really on us. Don't click on those clickbait titles. Do not look at those articles. Do not go to websites. And y'all know those websites that have those kinds of paparazzi-ish kinds of pictures on that. And just do your part. Sometimes it can be hard depending on how much energy you have or knowledge you have about it. Anyway, Sailor says, Willow is doing such an incredible job listening actively, showing empathy, and making Paris feel safe. Everyone deserves a friend like this. Yes, I was really blown away by how good a listener Willow is. I want to show this video to my students and say, this is someone who knows how to listen to someone and make them feel understood and make them feel like you're engaged. And I've known other therapists. One of my, perhaps my most, the therapist I look up to the most as just like a pure therapist, as someone who was good in the room with clients, was Virginia Satir. She had some kind of weird, questionable techniques at times that I won't go into because it was, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But for the most part, she was extremely engaged and she was locked in. And when you have a therapist or anyone that's just locked in, it feels good. It really frees you up to feel safe, to say things and explore, and just to feel heard. We just want to feel that way. So Willow was amazing at that. Good old Lavender says, I think Halle Berry successfully pushed for an anti-paparazzi law for children, but they don't really abide by it. Oh, that's interesting. All right. Well, that does it for that episode in which I bark at you about asking people where they're from. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.